One of the most popular neighborhoods here in Paris is the Marais, and in addition to its great museums, boutiques, and nightlife, it's a place that makes you feel like you've stepped back in time. It's full of quaint cobblestone streets and medieval alleyways, and here to tell us a bit more about just how the Marais became one of the city's oldest and best preserved neighborhoods is historian and museum educator Dr. Melissa Anderson from Paris Muse. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for being on the show again.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeannie.
Now, Melissa, Marais means marsh, and the Marais district was once just that, a marshy area outside of the city, but then it quickly became a playground for royals in the Middle Ages. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So the Marais is, at its heart, a medieval district. It was first incorporated into Paris in the 1300s when the French kings began building royal residences there. By the 17th century, the Marais was hands down Paris's most fashionable district. The who's who, the French aristocracy, moved there and built luxurious private homes, private mansions, which in French are called hôtels particuliers. But what really sets the Marais apart from the rest of the city in terms of it being old is that it largely survived destruction during Paris's massive 19th century modernization campaign.
All right, tell us a bit more about that modernization campaign. What happened exactly?
So in the 1800s, Paris was still a very medieval city, which meant that it was dense with narrow, crowded streets laid out with no real rhyme or reason. There weren't many public amenities, such as plumbing or even public parks. So to make way for the city that you and I recognize as Paris today, Emperor Napoleon III hired a man named Hausman to turn what had been a medieval city into a modern one. Hausman wasted no time erasing entire neighborhoods off the map to make way for wide tree-lined boulevards, stone apartments, department stores, and public parks. It's really hard to overstate just how transformative this project was.
So did Hausman have plans to also modernize the Marais?
Absolutely. So Hausman had plans for the Marais, but he was ousted from power before he could get to it. So what that means is that visiting the Marais today gives us a great chance to feel what old Paris, what pre-Hausman Paris would have looked like and felt like.
And what was that like? I know that things were quite bad back then.
Yeah, so later city planners actually had their eye on it, even after Hausman, mostly for public health reasons. Even as late as the 1950s, as many as 60% of homes in the Marais didn't have running water.
So how did the Marais become the chic, fashionable district it's become today?
So everything changed in 1965, when the Marais became a protected historic sector. Charles de Gaulle's Minister of Culture, André Malraux, led the initiative to save historic neighborhoods like the Marais by creating these historic sectors. And the Marais was actually the very first neighborhood in Paris to receive this designation. So afterwards, the city really started investing in conservation and development, and gentrification took hold at breakneck speed. So yes, today the Marais is very famous for being trendy and chic. It's a place to go to boutiques, to visit independent art galleries. Also starting in the 1980s, it became a real center for Paris's LGBTQ community and nightlife.
And it's also a big center of Jewish culture as well.
Absolutely. So the Marais has been a center of Paris's Jewish community going back to the 19th century. France was actually the very first country in Europe to emancipate its Jewish community during the French Revolution, which means that that Jews became full citizens in France. So after that, Jewish immigrants from Russia and Eastern Europe immigrated to Paris, and they largely settled in the Marais in the area around the Rue des Rosiers. They settled there because it was affordable, but also there had been a Jewish community there earlier in the Middle Ages. The Jewish quarter became known as the Pletzel, which is Yiddish for little place, and today it is still a center of Jewish culture. Nearby, there is the fabulous Museum of Jewish Art and History, and I highly recommend it.
One thing I love about the Marais as well are those delicious falafels. What other things are there to see in the Marais? What would you recommend?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite things to do is to grab a falafel or a shawarma or an ice cream and go sit in the Place des Vosges, which is, in my opinion, the most beautiful square in Paris. This is actually where Victor Hugo was living when he started his masterpiece, Les Miserables. I also love that many of those former private mansions are today museums. For example, the Picasso Museum or the Musée Carnavalet, which is the History of Paris Museum. I think it really says something about how historic this neighborhood is, that the History of Paris Museum is located in the Marais. Finally, the Shoah Memorial to the Holocaust is located in the Marais and is well worth a visit. You can see many of these sites and learn more about the history of the Marais on a Paris Muse tour. We offer an adult walking tour called From from marsh to magnificence. We also have an interactive family tour, Paris Discovery Walk, for families with children ages 6 to 12.
Great. Melissa, thank you so much for that look at the beautiful Marais district. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, as usual. Now, if you want more info about any of those walks that Melissa was just talking about, you can be sure to check out the Paris Muse website. It's parismuse.com.